Before we begin, thank you for being here and spending a part of your day with me. I truly hope this story makes your day a little better and give you a few minutes of wonder to enjoy. If you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe, like the video, leave a comment, and share it with someone you care about. Your support means a great deal to this channel. And now, let us step into the story. Captain-Doctor Mira Veyne was in the forward treatment corridor of the Earth hospital ship Talos Meridian when the sterilizer arm failed for the second time that week. It was not dramatic. Nothing exploded and nothing smoked. The arm simply stopped halfway through its turn, leaving a tray of sealed instruments hanging in front of a pressure door and forcing 3 nurses to step around a machine that had picked the worst possible moment to remember its age. That was frontier medicine on most days. Not glorious rescues and not stirring speeches. Mostly old equipment, tired people, and a long line of bodies that never cared how elegant a policy memo had sounded back on Earth. The arm released with a small shudder. "Congratulations," said Chief Nurse Pell from the next bay. "You have once again prevented civilization from ending in a sanitation corridor." Mira glanced over. "Do not tell the crew. They will start expecting miracles." Too late. That was how the watch began. Dry humor, light fatigue, and everyone aboard pretending exhaustion was not sitting just under the skin. Mira knew every one of those limits. She also knew how fragile they were. That morning, she was trying to finish a routine transfer cycle and guide the ship through one final outbound loop before systems inspection. Talos Meridian needed parts. The crew needed rest. Mira needed 6 uninterrupted hours in a room with no alarms in it. Instead, the bridge signal chimed twice. It was the pattern reserved for command traffic that did not want to be mistaken for an ordinary problem. Mira handed the reset tool back to Pell. "Keep the arm in manual until maintenance clears it. You going up? That sound means someone important has discovered a new way to make my day worse. Useful talent. It is popular in governance." She left the treatment corridor, past the open observation bay, where a Keeler cargo pilot slept through neural repair, and headed for the main lift. On the way, she checked the traffic summary on her wrist display. 3 inbound messages waited for her. One was from Earth Logistics about delayed coolant relays. One was from Navigator Toven Rees about routing changes near the outer arc. One was flagged high priority from Frontier Corridor Control. By the time she reached the bridge, she already disliked the shape of the morning. Commander Elias Wren stood at the tactical rail with his arms folded. He handled ship security and corridor threat assessment, and he carried himself like a man who trusted facts more than comfort and had been rewarded for that distrust too many times. Beside him, Legal Officer Sarah Holt was reading a live treaty packet with the stillness she used when language itself was becoming dangerous. Toven Rees sat forward at navigation, one hand hovering over a starfield projection redrawn in warning colors. Mira did not ask whether something was wrong. Everyone on the bridge already wore the answer. "Talk to me," she said. Toven expanded the projection. A frontier chain rolled into view, marked with trade beacons, migrant lanes, and emergency waypoints. One moon had been boxed in by 3 concentric warning rings. "Talos Verge," he said. "Outer recovery sector, former reconstruction belt interface. Full quarantine declaration issued 42 minutes ago." Mira knew the name. Nearly everyone working Frontier Aid knew it. Talos Verge had once been one of the Council's favorite examples after the war years. A moon rebuilt as proof that mixed settlement recovery could work if central systems were firm enough and public enough. Refugee permits, industrial retraining, infrastructure grants, clean press tours. It was the kind of project powerful people pointed at when they wanted history to look tidier than it had felt. "What triggered the declaration?" Mira asked. Elias answered first. "Officially, an emergent gene pathogenic event with cross-species adaptation risk." Sarah looked up from her screen. "The declaration includes a total. Access freeze. No private craft. No medical entry except under Council Biosecurity Authority." Mira stepped closer to the main display. "How close are we?" "Close enough to matter," said Toven. 4 hours if we change course now. Just under 3 if we burn harder than I would like." Mira read the notice in silence. The language was polished, urgent, and almost insultingly efficient. Talos Verge had experienced a dangerous bioadaptive cascade. All civilian movement was suspended. External contact was restricted. Independent intervention would be treated as destabilizing interference in an active interplanetary health containment zone. There were 100 ways to say, "Do not come here." This one had been written by professionals. "How did this land on our board?" she asked. Elias opened another window. "Because a partial distress packet leaked through before the quarantine field hardened. It routed through an Earth humanitarian relay, then to us." Mira turned. "Let me see it." Tovin transferred the packet to the central display. It was damaged and badly compressed. A voice channel cut in and out under static, while fragments of ward footage flickered across the screen. Crowded bunks under dim emergency strips. A man vomiting blood into a cloth. A woman seizing while someone off-screen called for a med kit that never arrived. Beneath the footage came broken text strings, incomplete medical logs, triage tags, and biochemistry snapshots. Mira stopped the playback and expanded the clinical data. The bridge stayed quiet. That, more than the footage, changed the air. She had seen outbreaks before. Real outbreaks had patterns. They moved through bodies with ugly logic. Fever curves, tissue response, cluster movement, incubation echoes. This did not feel like that. The markers repeated, yes, but in the wrong way. Neurological breakdown appeared without consistent transmission windows. Organ collapse showed up without any clear progression between households. Similar failure signatures appeared in people from non-adjacent residential blocks. It looked less like contagion and more like damage. Sarah saw the change in Mira's face first. "What?" Mira magnified one skin strip, then another. "These profiles do not sit right." Elias stepped closer. Meaning I want to know who said pathogen first and how quickly everyone else agreed. Serait expression tightened. Do not say that to the wrong people until you have something firmer. "I know." Mira let the packet run once more. This time she listened past the noise. There were voices buried under the static. Fear. Confusion. Someone asking whether the docks were still sealed. Someone else saying they had complied with every screening order. Then one clear fragment came through from a male voice strained thin by pain and a failing connection. "We are not contagious. We are being erased." The line ended in static. No one on the bridge spoke for a full 2 seconds. Mira felt the words settle, not as proof, but as weight. "Source identity?" she asked. Tovin shook his head. "No clean match." The packet came through a local maintenance relay and rode a collapsing channel. It could be medical staff, a resident, or anyone close enough to a transmitter that had not failed yet. Elias had already moved to the next problem. Whatever happened down there, the declaration is live. If we approach without authorization, we risk neutrality suspension and corridor seizure. Sarah did not soften it. More than that, if Earth is seen violating quarantine law in a council showcase recovery zone, some blocks will use it to reopen the old argument about human medical overreach. Mira knew that argument. Humans treated first and asked political permission later. Earth relief culture confused moral urgency with right. The accusation was unfair often enough to anger her, but not baseless enough to ignore. Humanity did have that instinct. In a cleaner galaxy, it might have been called admirable. In this one, it was often called inconvenient by people who preferred suffering to happen in the approved order. Mira drew a slow breath. What is our immediate mission window if we divert? Tovin brought up fuel and support projections. We can divert, verify from the outer ring, and still make station inspection if nothing goes wrong. If something does go wrong, we start spinning promises we do not own. That was the first clean answer she needed. Not entry, not rescue, not yet, just verification. Sarah turned fully toward her. Before you say anything rash, I want the treaty position clear. A council quarantine order in a mixed jurisdiction recovery zone is one of the few things our neutrality charter explicitly tells us not to break. Elias looked once more at the damaged footage. And if the quarantine is being used to bury something, the charter did not imagine that either. That was the bridge in one sentence. One officer defending the law. One officer measuring the threat. Mira stood between them and knew there was no version of this day in which everyone kept what they wanted. She straightened. First objective only. We move closer, stay outside the outer ring, and verify what we can ourselves. She looked from one station to the next. I want epidemiology review, atmosphere review, and a packet authentication attempt. Sarah, pull every emergency entry exception tied to civilian mass casualty or false health designation. Elias, give me the likely military response if we cross. Tovin, plot a lawful approach and the fastest unlawful one. I want both. Sarah gave her a long look. You said first objective. That is not the same as no. Correct. Mira keyed an internal ship alert at reduced priority. Not a panic call, just enough to wake the right people into readiness. As the bridge shifted in motion around her, she watched the red quarantine rings close and open over Talos Verge and felt an old, unwelcome certainty arrive. Whatever was happening on that moon was not going to stay a local health matter. And if Earth touched it, it would not stay only about a moon. Solace Meridian changed course 12 minutes later. It was not the kind of decision Mira liked to make while still unsure of the ground beneath it. On Earth, or anywhere with clean jurisdiction and cleaner records, she would have demanded second-tier data and waited for contamination review. Out here, waiting was often a polished name for abandoning people in the correct procedural order. By the time the ship completed the first burn, the medical deck had shifted from routine watch to contingency posture. Isolation partitions were checked, decontamination arches were powered, and intake teams were placed on rotating standby. The corridor lights stayed soft, but the ship's mood hardened. Mira walked the upper treatment level before returning to the bridge. She did that whenever the whole vessel began to tighten around an uncertain choice. A command decision landed differently when she had seen the faces that might pay for it. Nurse Pell was briefing a junior Keeler technician on improvised negative pressure triage. Short version, Pell was saying, if the line glows amber, you stop guessing and ask for help before you vaporize our remaining filters. The young technician looked alarmed. The line can vaporize filters? No, but fear is educational. Mira stopped by the central dispenser, where maintenance panel sat open and Chief Engineer Dave Insole had half his body buried in cabling. Tell me something comforting, Mira said. He did not look up. Gravity remains functional. Bold claim. I have people checking. He finally pulled back, wiped both hands on a cloth, and peered at her. He had spent enough years near command to smell a bad decision before it was spoken aloud. We are diverting from more than a scan, aren't we? Mira did not answer immediately. Davin's eyes narrowed. That is not a no. I am collecting possibilities. That means yes with paperwork. Despite herself, Mira almost smiled. That is why I came to engineering. I needed optimism. You came because legal tells you what is forbidden and tactical tells you how painful it will be, but I tell you what breaks first. Fair. He leaned one shoulder against the rack. Then hear this clearly. If you cross a hard quarantine ring and the local authorities decide to be theatrical, they do not have to fire on us to hurt us. They can ping our registry, block corridor fuel, freeze resupply access, and turn one ship into a floating example. He shrugged once. We would stay alive. We would just do it expensively. That was the political cost, plain and useful. Mira stored it beside the medical doubt already building in her head. How long could you keep us operational if they went that route? She asked. Davin answered too quickly, which meant he had already thought about it. Long enough to regret the people in charge of our civilization. When Mira returned to the bridge, Sarah had 3 treaty stacks open and looked no happier with any of them. There is one narrow exception under civilian mass casualty doctrine if a quarantine declaration can be shown materially false or deliberately misclassified, Sarah said. The problem is obvious. We would have to prove bad designation before entering, and the designation is what prevents us from entering to prove it. Administrative perfection, said Elias. Sarah ignored that. There is another angle. Humanitarian verification under imminent record destruction. Mira stopped halfway to her chair. Go on. Sarah tapped text into view. If there's credible risk that active casualty records, identity logs, or medical chain evidence are being intentionally erased in a restricted zone, a neutral medical vessel may argue immediate preservation interest. May argue, Elias repeated, which means after the fact. Almost everything worth doing out here is after the fact, Sarah said. That changed the shape of the problem again. It was no longer only about whether Talos Verge held sick people under a false quarantine. It was also about whether someone was using the quarantine to clean the record before witnesses arrived. Tovin cleared his throat and expanded the tactical map. Outer ring in 11 minutes. There's already a Council biosecurity tender holding station there and 2 security escorts farther sunward. Not a war posture. Just enough metal to make a point. Mira took her seat. Open a channel to the tender at standard courtesy range. The response came before the channel fully resolved. The face on the main display belonged to a Council quarantine officer from species Mira recognized but could not name quickly under pressure. He had long facial ridges, pale gold eyes, and the measured stillness of someone who did not expect contradiction for people in hospital gray. This is Supervisor Kel Arden of Council Biosecurity, he said. Earth vessel, Solace Meridian. You're approaching a sealed emergency zone. Reduce speed and acknowledge containment guidance. Mira kept her voice even. Supervisor Arden, this is Captain-Doctor Mira Veyne of Solace Meridian. We have received civilian distress data routed through an Earth humanitarian relay. We request outer ring medical verification and direct casualty status. Arden did not blink. Request denied. Talos Verge is under active pathogenic risk containment. We are not asking for landing authority. We are asking for verification. Denied. On what clinical basis? On the authority of the declaration you have already received. Sarah muted her microphone and said quietly, he is giving you paper, not medicine. Mira knew that. The exchange was still useful. Tone mattered. Word choice mattered. The shape of the refusal might matter later. Supervisor, she said, our duty charter includes civilian casualty assessment where feasible. If there are unstable residents inside the ring, I need to know whether treatment corridors exist and whether triage support is functioning. Arden folded his hands. Dr. Veyne, Talos Verge possesses internal capacity. That answer landed wrong at once. Not because it was impossible, but because he said it like a man repeating a line handed to him by people who hoped no one would test it. We have packet evidence of system distress, Mira said. You have packet debris from unauthorized civilian transmitters. There are people inside that zone. There are always people inside zones, Captain. Elias turned his face slightly away from the screen. It was the motion he made when he was trying not to let anger become visible enough to be useful. Arden continued in the same calm tone. Your vessel's presence is already being noted by security review. I advise immediate compliance. A hospital ship gains nothing by entering a matter it cannot understand. Mira let the silence stretch one beat longer than politeness allowed. A hospital ship often enters matters others would prefer remain poorly understood. The corner of Arden's mouth shifted. Not quite irritation. Recognition, perhaps, that he had moved from warning into the first clean edge of a contest. You are close to trespass, he said. No, Mira said. I'm close to a decision. Take the safer one. The channel closed from his side. Tovin exhaled softly. That was friendly for people setting up to ruin us. Sarah answered without humor. That was the polite version. The next version will contain definitions. Mira watched the tender hold its exact place against the starfield. The security escorts behind it did not move, which in frontier practice was the same as laying a hand near a weapon and smiling for the record. Status on our own scans? She asked. Tovin shifted data windows. Atmospheric bleed from the moon is inconsistent with uncontrolled biological release. Surface traffic is nearly dead. Dock movement is minimal. There are power fluctuations across 3 residential sectors and 1 medical district. The outer comm lattice is being actively scrubbed. Actively scrubbed. That was the next step. First medical suspicion. Now possible erasure of records. Mira turned to the science rail, where Senior Analyst Cornhale had just arrived at a near run, still fastening one closure on his field coat. Corin. He pushed a breath out through his nose. I review the packet on my way up. I cannot certify cause from what we have, but I can tell you what I dislike. The biochemical signatures cluster too tightly around a synthetic adaptation corridor. It looks as if the same intervention hit many different bodies and failed in similar ways. Sarah looked up sharply. Intervention meaning treatment? Corin hesitated. Or enhancement? Or environmental conditioning? Something designed, not something wild. Elias spoke flatly. Say the ugly version. Corin did. It resembles a controlled biomedical program gone wrong. The bridge went still again, but this time not from uncertainty. This time it was direction. Mira leaned back only far enough to think clearly. Talos Verge, a high-profile recovery moon. A sudden total quarantine. Distressed residents. Synthetic marker patterns. Blocked access. Rehearsed refusals. Scrub comms. With every passing minute, it was becoming less plausible that they were being kept out for ordinary infection control. The first question had been whether they needed to look. The next had been whether they could verify anything lawfully. Now the question was narrowing again. If this was a failed program and the outer lattice was being scrubbed, how long before the best evidence disappeared? Sarah was the first to say the next dangerous thing aloud. If this is a control program failure, somebody does not just fear casualties. They fear documentation. Elias nodded once. Which means if we wait, the best evidence may not survive. And if we enter, Sarah said, we hand our enemies the clean legal frame they want. Human recklessness. Earth medical interference. Emotional breach of biosecurity. Mira knew she should sit with that longer. Gather one more layer. One more argument. Then the damaged distress packet replayed in her head. We are not contagious. We are being erased. People rarely found words that specific by accident. Call senior staff to briefing room 2, she said. Medical, tactical, legal, engineering, environmental, and transport. 5 minutes. No one argued. That alone told her the bridge already knew which direction they were leaning. The briefing room was too small for the number of worries it held, which suited Frontier Command perfectly. Mira stood at the narrow end of the table with Talos Verge rotating above them, the quarantine rings throwing red arcs over the moon's pale surface. She did not waste anyone's time. Here is where we are. Talos Verge is under total council quarantine. Official cause is a gene pathogenic emergency with cross-species risk. What we have independently observed does not fit that story cleanly. She rested both hands on the table. My first objective was verification. We have enough now to say the official story is no longer holding together. My second concern is medical. If the synthetic markers are real, people are being hurt by something designed, not something wild. My third concern is legal and political. If records are being scrubbed while access stays blocked, then quarantine is doing more than containing bodies. It is containing the truth. She looked around the table. Before we choose anything bigger, I need one thing clear. If we go in, the mission is simple. Save who can, still be saved, and keep the truth from being erased. She nodded to Corin. He summarized the clinical anomalies. Then Sarah explained the treaty exposure in language everyone could hate equally. Then Elias laid out the security picture. Then Dave patched in from engineering by wall screen, explained what administrative retaliation would do to the ship if corridor systems turned punitive. When they were done, Mira said recommendations. Brief and honest. Elias went first. Enter. Outer scan only if you are still hoping this behaves politely. I do not think it will. If there are living civilians down there and the records are being scrubbed, delay helps the wrong side. Sarah followed. My recommendation is one more lawful verification request, then a formal protest to Earth, then forced observation from outside the ring while we build a documentation chain. Elias made a sound of impatience. Sarah did not look at him. You invited honesty, Commander. I'm being honest, not timid. Davin's face on the screen hardened. My recommendation is that if you cross, do it with a real plan, not moral enthusiasm. We do not have the luxury of noble improvisation followed by mechanical surprise. Pell, speaking for medical, said what Mira already knew the deck would say. If they are alive and untreated, every hour matters. But if you bring something aboard that actually is transmissible, every hour matters in a different direction. We need strict compartment lines from the first boot down. Tovin folded his hands. If we commit quickly. Drifting indecisively near a quarantine line is how one becomes useful footage. That room was Earth in miniature. Law, duty, engineering, care, irritation. None of it was cleanly wrong. Mira let them finish, then asked the question she cared about most. If we do nothing but observe for 6 hours, what improves? No one answered at once. Then Corin said, our confidence level. And if the data is being erased? He looked at the table. Then our confidence improves around an emptier truth. That decided it. Mira straightened. We proceed under humanitarian verification and imminent record destruction risk. We do not announce. Breach intent. We close to the ring, assess one final time, then cross if the indicators hold. She looked around the room so no one could mistake the order. Objectives are narrow. Confirm the nature of the event. Stabilize survivable casualties. Preserve medical and identity records if they are under active deletion. Extract if feasible. No mission creep. No speeches. No one confuses courage with untidiness. She looked directly at Sarah. You still disagree? I still think this can damage Earth badly. Do you think it is wrong? Sarah held her gaze for a long second. No, she said at last. I think it is expensive. Mira nodded once. That was enough. Orders moved through the ship within minutes. Containment teams sealed off 2 intake bays. Field kits were loaded for planetary descent. Portable forensic readers were assigned to medical command instead of evidence control, a distinction Sarah noted with visible appreciation for the wording. Elias placed response teams on protective standby. Tovin plotted a narrow insertion route timed between surveillance sweeps, legal enough to be argued and unlawful enough to be remembered. As Talos Meridian approached the outer quarantine ring, the Council tender opened a channel again, this time with no greeting. Earth vessel. Reduce speed immediately. You are approaching containment violation. Mira answered from the bridge without sitting. Council supervisor. We are conducting emergency humanitarian verification under distress signal authority. You do not possess that authority here. We possess enough to be answerable for using it. The pause on the other end was tiny and telling. Then Arden said, if you cross, Captain Veyne, understand clearly that the record will show you were warned. Mira looked at Talos Verge turning in red arcs, then at the ship statuses around her, then at the faces of the people who had not walked away from the decision. Then keep the record clean, she said. Talos Meridian is crossing. Tovin executed the burn before the reply finished arriving. The quarantine ring slid across the display. Alarms chimed once, not for danger yet, but for boundary passage. Somewhere in the ship, bulkheads sealed into new patterns and medical teams took one quiet breath together. Talos Meridian entered Talos Verge's forbidden sky. From that moment forward, whatever happened on the moon would belong not only to a buried civilian zone and the people trying to erase it, it would belong to Earth as well. Talos Verge looked orderly from orbit. That was the first ugly thing about it. A real collapse from disease, riot, or open abandonment usually showed itself in obvious wounds. Fires, shattered docks, emergency traffic, random movement, improvised beacons. Talos Verge had almost none of that. Residential grids still held their shape. Utility spines still glowed in long patient lines. The moon did not look dead. It looked managed. Mira hated that more than open chaos. Landing options, she said. Tovin shifted 3 zones into view. Primary med port is locked under Council bioseal. Secondary cargo deck is damaged. There is one maintenance platform near Civic Ward 7 with intermittent power and low surveillance coverage. Low compared to what? Compared to being under a microscope, Tovin said. Elias took over. I can get you down with 1 shuttle and a 12-person team. Protective gear, non-military profile, medical corps first. We keep armed posture defensive and quiet. If the security grid shifts hard, We pull before anyone gets sentimental. Mira looked at the grid. Medical Corps is me, Pell, Corin, 2 triage nurses, and 1 field systems technician. Elias, you lead security. I want 1 environmental specialist and 1 forensic clerk with us. Seraste à boire. Sarah spoke immediately. No, Mira turned. If you find record tampering or false designation, Sarah said, you will need legal eyes on context from the first clean read. I am not staying on the ship while you walk into a council showcase quarantine and improvise jurisprudence on a wet floor. Elias muttered, some people do know how to flatter. Sarah ignored him. Mira considered the objection for 1 breath only. Sarah was right. If the moon contains altered identity logs or abuse of emergency doctrine, chain interpretation matters as much as retrieval, Sarah said. Fine, Mira said. You. Cool me. But if we start running, you do not stop to argue with the architecture. I have never argued with architecture. You once filed a protest against a customs wall. It was a discriminatory wall. Pell snorted softly from the rear station, and the sound eased exactly half a notch of tension. As the shuttle descended, the scale of the settlement came into view. Long civic blocks and work sectors stretched under a pale wash of light, but the avenues between them were nearly empty. Corin watched the surface telemetry in narrowing silence. Still no spread pattern, no environmental cascade. If this were uncontrolled pathogen movement, we should be seeing more irregular heat activity around family clusters, transit shelters, or emergency stations. Instead, there were cold nodes, whole dormitory wings with no heat, stacked habitation sectors with reduced power, and medical sites alive enough to register systems but dead enough to feel abandoned. The maintenance platform came into view below them. It was a square of dull alloy with 2 service towers and a cracked guidance strip. 3 people waited near the center, one waving both arms above his head, not in panic, but to make certain no one aboard mistook living survivors for debris. The shuttle touched down with a low, hard scrape. Elias's team moved first with a perimeter sweep, an environmental scan, and entry clearance. Only then did Mira step down into Talos Verge's thin daylight. The air smelled metallic and dry, not contaminated in the way the official notices had implied. The platform itself told a clearer story than any declaration. 1 portable gurney, 2 empty water cells, a wall panel pried open with a maintenance bar. Someone had been surviving here by refusal, not by system support. The man who had waved them and came forward half a step, then stopped as if uncertain whether moving too fast would make the ship disappear again. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and far too thin for the way his transit overalls hung on him. One side of his neck bore the pale line of an old service scar. Do not leave yet, he said. There was no greeting and no formal plea. Just that. Mira heard the exhaustion under it and answered in the same register. We came to work, not to wave. Something like grim relief passed over his face. Good. He pointed to the 2 others. Ria Mock, Civic Medical Administrator. Tomas Eid, Power Systems. I am Jonas Quill, Sector Engineering Lead. Elias's glance flicked to the scar on Jonas's neck and the way he stood. Former military. Former enough to dislike being recognized by posture. Mira stepped closer. Captain-Doctor Mira Veyne. Earth Hospital Ship Solace Meridian. We need the shortest true version first. What is happening here? Jonas did not waste time on the official lie. People started collapsing after mandatory adaptation rounds. Not all at once. It came in waves. Confusion, tremors, organ failure. Then they sealed the ports, locked the clinics, and declared contagion. Ria Mock looked worse than Jonas. She seemed older than her file would probably say, with the kind of administrative fatigue that came from trying to keep records honest under bad supervision for too long. She held a portable slate with both hands as if letting go would take the remaining order with it. They cut central medication access 4 days ago, she said. Not all of it, just enough to make it look like rationing under emergency doctrine. We still had pain control for high-priority personnel and security-associated categories. Everyone else started getting delay codes. Mira felt Elias go, still beside her. Different story, same cold instinct. How many living residents? Mira asked. Rhea swallowed once. Known and reachable, just under 300. Maybe more in seal blocks if they have not lost power. Full pre-quarantine registry was over 2,000. The number landed hard and clean. Too many to save in one sweep. Enough to turn delay into a moral wound no one would forget. Mira forced the next questions into order. What categories are here? Jonas answered. Reconstruction labor, environmental technicians, registered migrant families, contract maintenance crews, spouses on dependent visas, and a small veteran support cohort from Earth's old engineering corps. No militia. No insurgent cells. No one who fits the story they will tell. Thomas. Eid, who had not spoken yet, finally did. They changed our tags. Mira turned to him. His hands shook badly enough that he pressed one into the other to hide it. In the records, we were residents, workers, licensed staff. Then after the shutdown, people started showing as hazard liabilities or restricted bio units. Even the dead. Sarah stepped closer at that. You saw this directly? I maintained power for admin nodes. I saw enough before they cut local access. Rhea lifted the slate. I copied fragments. Not proof by council standards. Enough proof for anyone with a conscience. Mira met her eyes. We will take that. Jonas gestured toward the service corridor leading into the civic blocks. The worst cases are in Ward 7 and Processing Hall 2. If you still have any real medicine left, do not spend time being shocked. No one on Mira's team needed that warning, but she appreciated the economy of it. They moved. Mira entered Ward 7 through a maintenance lock Jonas overrode manually. Inside, the room sound hit first. Not screaming. Worse. A low scattered field of breath, coughing, restrained groans, and the weak mechanical tones of half-maintained monitors trying to preserve dignity without supplies. Pell swore once under her breath and began assigning triage before Mira had even reached the first bed. The patients were adults across species and class, exactly as Jonas had said. A human water reclamation foreman with tremor spikes and liver collapse markers. A Brin filtration specialist convulsing at irregular intervals. A Keeler Transit clerk with yellowed eyes and rigid hands from neurotoxicity. A gray-haired Earth veteran from the post-war engineering battalions whose case file still listed him as fit for civic labor, even while his body clearly was not. Mira moved through them quickly, because horror was a luxury and medicine was a clock. Start the stabilization line here. Keep the convulsive cases separate if we can. Full scans on neurodecline. Fluids now, not after argument. Pell, I want pain control open across need, not status. Corin, log biomarkers against the packet patterns. Sarah, if you see record terminals, tag them for chain capture. And old man on the third row caught Mira's wrist as she adjusted his line. His grip was surprisingly firm. You are Earth. Yes. They told us Earth signed the closure order. The sentence hit in the exact place where future trouble was already waiting. Mira did not lie. I do not know everything Earth signed. I know I am here now. He held her gaze 1 second longer, then let go. That will do for this hour. Rows farther down, Pell had reached 2 workers arguing too weakly over who should get the first full relief dose. She ended the argument with the efficient cruelty of a competent nurse. Neither of you gets to be noble. One of you goes first because your kidneys are losing and the other waits 3 minutes because his numbers are ugly in a different order. If you dislike it, live long enough to complain in writing. Tomas Eid, following with a portable power cell, gave a thin, surprised laugh despite the room. It was the first sound in the ward that resembled life more than endurance. In a side office once used for civic intake, Rhea found the first clean, administrative slice of a larger lie. She called Mira and Sarah over without raising her voice. On the screen were parallel lists. Before quarantine, the entries read contract engineer, licensed machinist, reconstruction labor supervisor, dependent spouse, veteran support assignee. After quarantine, the entries read restricted biohazard unit, non-repatriable exposure subject, containment liability, disposal pending. Sarah read the columns twice and did not speak for a moment. Mira felt something in her settle colder than anger. This was no longer just delayed medicine or a corporate trial hidden under a public health curtain. Someone had rewritten personhood for convenience. The people on Talos Verge had not only been left to fail, they had been converted into categories easier to abandon. Sarah finally exhaled. They changed the names first. Rhea nodded. Once the names changed, everything else got easier. That was the moment Mira understood the full shape of the work ahead. Rescue mattered. Treatment mattered. But records mattered now with equal force. If the records died or were cleaned, Talos Verge could be buried as a sealed hazard with regrettable casualties, and no one outside the moon would ever know how much law had helped do it. She looked at Sarah. Can you hold chain on this? Not alone, Sarah said, but I can start it. Do it. As the legal and forensic teams began capturing the altered status files, Elias returned from the outer corridor. We have movement, he said. Not military entry yet. Local security drones, slow and deliberate. Someone wants us to know time is narrowing. Jonas Quill appeared behind him, face grayer than before. Then we need to get to processing hall 2. Mira turned. Why? Because that is where they kept the complete adaptation rosters before they started cleansing local records. If those servers go, the moon becomes a rumor. Mira looked back toward the ward, toward Pell, and the unstable patients who still needed evacuation, and then toward the hallway where the corridor lights blinked under failing power. Every second felt more expensive than the one before. This was the first real split. Save only who could be moved now and surrender the truth later, or go after the truth while the living still breathe in rooms that might not survive another cycle. She hated the choice on site, which usually meant it was real. If we only save bodies and lose the record, she said, more to the room than to herself, they will say Talos Verge was a sealed hazard and nothing more. She looked back toward the beds. If we only chase the record and leave the living, then we become part of the same lie. Her jaw tightened. We do both. Elias did not ask how. He only asked what breaks first. Our margins, Mira said, probably followed by someone's patience. Move. They left a reduced team in Ward 7 and pushed deeper into Talos Verge, following Jonas through service arteries built during the moon's optimistic years, back when every corridor had been designed to suggest permanence and shared future. Now the walls carried emergency overlays and half-deleted hazard icons. More than once, Mira passed a notice board still displaying council reassurance bulletins to residents who had clearly not been reassured by them. At the mouth of Processing Hall 2, Tomas stopped so hard Elias nearly ran into him. A figure lay against the wall, just inside the door, in a civilian coat with an identification lanyard and one hand stretched to a fallen console. Rhea crossed the distance first and crouched. Levin Ors, Records Supervisor. Dead for hours, maybe longer. No visible estrago. Just collapse. Sarah took one look at the dead man's terminal and said the word no one needed, but everyone understood. Purge. Across the main wall, storage arrays were walking through automated deletion in clean blue lines. Mira felt the entire moon narrow into one brutal clarity. The quarantine had not been built only to isolate a dangerous medical event. It had been built to buy time. Time to let people die. Time to change their names. Time to erase the evidence before anyone honest arrived close enough to see what the system had done. Cut the purge, she said. Processing Hall 2 had been built for registration, labor allocation, and settlement review. Now it looked like a place trying to forget itself. Sarah was already at the nearest terminal by the time Mira crossed the threshold. Local control is severed. Purge authorization is running from an off-moon relay through Council Biosecurity Override. Corin moved to the main server column and plugged in a field reader. I can mirror fragments if the arrays stay alive. Elias checked corridor angles, then the overhead grid. You have maybe minutes before something more persuasive than a drone arrives. Jonas Quill went to Levin Ors's body and took the fallen slate from beneath his hand. He was trying to block the wipe manually. Can his access help? Mira asked. Jonas looked once at the dead supervisor's open eyes, then closed them with his thumb before answering. If enough of the old structure still respects him. Tomas connected a portable power shunt into the nearest console. The screen flashed, trembled, and restored one buried partition line before the purge tried to swallow it again. There, he said. Resident Authority Lane. Hidden behind disposal protocols. Sarah was beside him at once. Open it. Rhea fed old medical credentials into a secondary panel. Korn began mirroring whatever surfaced. Mira stood at the center of the room, holding all the threads in her head at once. The ward team still needed supplies. The shuttle clock was running. The drones outside were no longer pretending to be harmless. And yet this room mattered almost as much as the patients. This was where the surviving proof still lived. The adaptation rosters were here, meaning the full lists of who had been given what and when. The status changes were here, too, the moments when residents on paper became liabilities on paper. If the room went dark, Talos Verge would leave behind patients and rumors, but not a case anyone powerful had to answer. The first recovered files hit Korn's display in bursts. There were adaptation protocol authorizations under Helix Dominion subsidiary names. There were environmental gene tolerance trials coded as post-war resilience support. There were batch dosing logs tied to resident work classes. There were adverse reaction memos flagged internal only and refusal orders on evacuation requests because mass transfer would, in a line so dry Mira nearly missed its brutality, compromise continuity of recovery narrative. Jonas stared at the phrase as though he had been struck. Recovery narrative, he repeated. Rhea's face changed in a way Mira would remember later. It was not shock and not surprise. It was the end of any remaining wish to defend an institution one had once served honestly. They built a slogan first, Rhea said quietly. Then they made us fit it. Sarah kept reading with legal hunger now, not detached analysis. There are council-level acknowledgement stamps, not signatures from the full chamber, but enough to show this was not some hidden contractor stunt. Someone in Central Review knew the adaptation program existed. Korn brought up a chain map. Here, batch effects cross to medical response planning. Then, after failure markers spike, designation shifts from resident welfare to biosecurity containment. It was not improvised. The paperwork for the quarantine conversion was prepared in parallel. That was the harder truth under all the data. The adaptation rosters were not abstract research. Sheets. They were the list of who got dosed and who got watched. The status changes were not routine updates. They were the moment people stopped being residents and started being easier to isolate, delay, and discard. And the purge was exactly what it sounded like. Not cleaning a database. Cleaning the story. Mira felt the truth arrive in its ugliest complete form. Talos Verge had never become a crisis that forced a clumsy quarantine. Talos Verge had become an embarrassment, and quarantine had been the mechanism selected to keep embarrassment from becoming scandal. Elias cut in from the door. We have company. 3 drones hovered beyond the glass partition, thin-bodied and lawful-looking, the kind security systems preferred because they resembled clean procedure more than force. One flashed a corridor notice across the door in multiple languages. The display carried a simple order. This was a restricted containment zone. Unauthorized data capture had to be surrendered. Custody review would begin at once. Tomas gave a short laugh without humor. That always sounds friendlier when you're not the one being erased. Mira stepped to the center console and keyed open a direct hailing line through the local security mesh. Supervisor Kel Arden answered in audio only this time. Captain Veyne, he said, you continue to worsen your position. My position is secondary. I suspected you would say that. You have interfered with a sealed health event, accessed protected data, and introduced an unverified external medical force into a controlled zone. You mean I found living civilians in locked wards with withheld treatment and altered legal status? A pause followed. Then Arden said, leave the records. Take your patience if you must. We can still reduce the misunderstanding. The sentence was so smooth Mira almost admired the training behind it. Not a threat. Not yet. An offer to define the event more gently if she cooperated in her own narrowing. Sarah heard it too. She mouthed one silent word at Mira. Bargain. Mira answered without moving from the console. Misunderstanding implies confusion. I'm no longer confused. Then be prudent. Prudence would have been to treat the people you sealed down here. Dr. Veyne, you're looking at fragments from an active emergency response. No, Mira said. I'm looking at evidence that someone renamed residents into liabilities so they could be left without witnesses. Silence again, longer this time. When Arden spoke, the courtesy had thinned. You do not yet understand the scale of what you are touching. Mira believed him. That was the problem. Then explain it to me in front of the council later, she said. For now, we are keeping the records. She cut the line. Elias did not comment on the wisdom of that. We need to move now. The drones are still waiting for permission to escalate, but they have brought friends. Corin transferred mirror data into 3 separate encrypted modules. Sarah sealed chain notes with her personal legal key. Rhea added surviving medical administration logs, everyone she could still reach. Jonas found the adaptation roster, the list that tied names and work assignments to batch schedules. Tomas extracted 2 local override codes that might still unlock war dispensers if the central mesh did not kill them first. Mira looked at the dead records supervisor once more before they left. Levin Orza tried to block the purge alone and died at a station for it. People like him never reached the speeches. They never got called heroes in public rooms. They just decided, very late, that being useful to a lie was no longer tolerable. She said, "Take his slate." Rhea nodded and slipped it into an evidence pouch. On the run back toward Ward 7, the moon's outward calm finally broke. More drones appeared. Corridor doors sealed. Distant lock cycles slammed shut one sector at a time. The system had shifted from concealment to containment under pressure. Talos Verge was trying to close around them like a bureaucratic fist. Elias rerouted the team through a utility spine and kept them moving with sharp, economical commands. There was no theatrical combat, only threshold breaches and hard choices about seconds. That suited Mira. The real violence here had been structural long before anyone raised a weapon. At Ward 7, they found Pell and the remaining medical team exactly where Mira had left them, which meant the situation was either barely under control or one breath beyond it. Pell did not bother with preamble. We stabilized 23 enough to move. Another 11 are transport poor, but may hold if I get the unlocked meds Tomas promised me. If you have come back with philosophy instead of access, I will personally eject you into orbit. Tomas held up the override codes like a sacrament. I bring practical devotion that earned the smallest flicker of tired relief from Pell. She took the codes and went to work on the locked dispensers while Mira crossed to the older engineering veteran who had spoken earlier. He was still alive, though only because the body sometimes remained stubborn after the system had already made peace with losing it. His name band now displayed correctly on the recovered local file. Martin Hade, Earth Reconstruction Corps, retired to civilian settlement support. He looked at Mira through a haze of pain and sedation. You came back. Yes. That was not the safe choice. No. Martin swallowed once. Good. Mira adjusted his line. You knew what they were doing here. Enough to know we were meant to be proof of something. Proof of what? That people can be reshaped to fit damaged places more cheaply than damaged places can be made fit for people. The sentence held for a moment in the ward's failing light. It was not the full legal case. It was something worse and simpler. It was the philosophy underneath. Mira finished her check and moved on before emotion could slow her hands. Extraction became a problem of ugly arithmetic. The shuttle could not carry everyone in one lift, and Solace Meridian could not remain indefinitely inside the quarantine ring while council patients hardened into open interdiction. Mira, Pell, and Elias built the first movement list together. The most unstable went first. Those whose records were most likely to disappear went second. A handful of witnesses went third. There was never enough room for all the reasons at once. Jonas Quill objected when Mira placed him on the second lift. I stay until the last extraction. You are symptomatic. I am. Still walking. You are also one of the few people who can anchor this settlement's history from inside. Jonas stared at the floor for 1 second, then back at her. You sound like I matter. You do. Mira said. That is why I need you alive enough to be inconvenient in public. He let out a broken half-laugh. That may be the nicest thing anyone has said to me since quarantine. The first shuttle left overloaded but controlled. Mira remained with the second group, not because it was wise, but because command, medicine, and shame all demanded the same thing. She had crossed into the sealed zone. She was not going to leave the last ward team to improvise the final pull while she sat behind glass in orbit telling herself she was preserving strategic clarity. The second lift went worse. As they moved the remaining transportable patients toward the service locks, the security grid finally abandoned polite choreography. Corridor barriers dropped 2 sectors ahead. One drone fired a disabling pulse into a ceiling rail, showering hot fragments across the floor and driving 2 nurses to cover. Elias's team answered with defensive countermeasures, not lethal fire, but enough to blind the drone cluster and buy a path. The message from Council was still controlled. Do not force us to say it was violence. The answer from Earth, embodied by a hospital ship and a crew too tired to be elegant, was equally controlled. Then stop forcing us to choose between records and the living. They reached the shuttle with 31 survivors. For critical packs, 3 encrypted evidence modules, 11 ores of slate, and a hull scar on the port side that Davin would later describe in language unfit for diplomacy. Solace Meridian hauled them in through emergency containment while the outer security escorts finally moved from symbolic position to active shadowing. Not attack. Not yet. Something more corrosive than that. The implication that every corridor between Talos Verge and open space might now become a negotiation conducted through threat. On the medical deck, the chaos became the ship's own, and therefore almost comforting. Intake bays opened. Isolation lines held. Corn confirmed. The marker set matched the surface cases. Pell swore at 3 systems, 2 officers, and 1 dispenser in the same calm tone she used for weather updates. Mira stood in containment bay, too long enough to watch the first transfer from moon stretcher to shipbed before Sarah found her. The data holds, Sarah said. More than holds. It is enough to trigger chamber interest if we can get it out intact. If. Sarah hesitated, which Mira disliked immediately. What? Earth replied. Mira took the message strip. It was concise and careful in the worst possible way. Earth Medical External Affairs acknowledged receipt of preliminary concern regarding Talos Verge. Earth advised Solace Meridian to preserve life where possible, maintain evidence chain, and avoid actions likely to foreclose diplomatic remedy. Pending immediate review, Mira Veyne was instructed to prepare for compulsory testimony before Galaxy Council oversight should formal complaint be lodged. Not if. Should. Mira read the line twice. They are already bracing for a hearing. Yes. Do they support us? Sera chose honesty. They support the version of us that still leaves room for them to survive the politics. Mira looked through the bay glass at the survivors from Talos Verge. Workers. Residents. 1 veteran with oxygen support. A Brin systems technician in induced neural calm. People who had obeyed settlement law, filled out forms, taken mandatory adaptation rounds, and woken up one morning inside a live vast enough to rename them. Then we make survival expensive for the politics, she said. Sarah gave her a long, searching look. If you testify, they would try to make this about your breach. Your judgment, your emotion, your appetite for intervention. They can try. They will also drag Earth through the old containment clause. Mira nodded. They should. That surprised Sarah visibly. You mean that? Yes. Mira did not enjoy the thought, but she knew now that a clean story would fail. If Earth arrived before the Council and acted as though the problem were only foreign cruelty, the truth would slip. Humanity had not designed Talos Verge's adaptation program. Humanity had not ordered the false quarantine, but Earth had signed enough broad post-war emergency language to help build the door through which the rest walked. If Mira wanted the chamber to believe her when it mattered most, she would have to carry that burden too. Outside containment, Elias stepped onto the deck, still wearing surface dust. Council escorts have declared us under pending review and advised route compliance to the nearest authority hub. Advised, Sarah said. Elias's mouth shifted, with many metal reminders. Tovin appeared on the bay display from a bridge. Captain, they're not blocking departure outright, which means they want a public process, not a chase. Mira understood the strategy at once. If they stopped Talos Meridian violently, the moon might become a scandal before the records could be framed. Better to let the ship leave under shadow, summon Mira into a chamber, and reduce everything there to questions of method, compliance, and emotionally overextended human medicine. That was the next battlefield. The hearing was no longer a possibility. It was the shape the conflict had chosen. Mira looked one final time at the survivors being stabilized under Earthlight, and then back to Sarah and Elias. Then we do not drift home pretending the hard part is over, she said. We prepare the case from now. No one in the bay mistook that for confidence. It was discipline. Talos Verge had been a crime. The council would be the place where the galaxy decided whether that crime would keep its official name. And Mira, having crossed the ring and taken the people and the records both, had just been made impossible to leave out of that decision. The council's fear did not impress Mira. She arrived with Sarah Holt, 3 sealed evidence chains, and the kind of exhaustion no amount of official hospitality could soften. Talos Meridian had been routed to external medical anchorage under review status. Elias remained with the ship and the survivors. Earth had sent council, support staff, and a message so careful it almost qualified as cowardly. Present the facts. Protect the lanes. Avoid rhetorical excess. Preserve Earth's standing. As if standing in truth had ever been easy. Neighbors in rooms like this. The hearing chamber assigned to Talos Verge was not the Grand Central Hall. That was useful in its own way. It meant the council still hoped to classify the matter as technical doctrine, not civilization-level disgrace. Mira intended to make that distinction harder to keep. Before the session, Earth Council Nalin Arvo met her in a waiting room dressed in muted stone and strategic understatement. I will say this once, he told her. They want your decision to be the story. It was a story, Mira said. A ship crossed a ring. Yes, they want only that story. If the room stays focused on breach, command judgment, and human intervention culture, the rest becomes administrative dispute. Mira looked at the sealed evidence case on the table between them. Then do not let the room stay there. Nalin almost smiled. Good. You understand what I am useful for. Sarah, standing by the wall display with her arms folded, added the sharper warning. Do not let them turn sincerity into weakness. They will try. Mira nodded. She had already made peace with the real burden. She was not here as a neutral scientist. She was the officer who crossed the quarantine ring, extracted residents, pulled protected records, and refused to leave the dead and renamed where they had been sorted. Everything true about the case came tied to her actions. That was risk. It was also force. The chamber opened with the usual controlled insult of institutional procedure. Names, roles, scope, questions of authority. Council representatives framed Talos Verge as a matter of emergency biosecurity under strain. Helix Dominion, through a panel advocate rather than a named executive, described the adaptation program as lawful frontier resilience support tragically complicated by unforeseeable system interactions. The security bloc called Mira's entry destabilizing. Not cruel, never cruel, just destabilizing. Civilization loved that word when it wanted pain to sound regrettable and useful at the same time. Then Mira was called. She stood at the testimony rail, heard her own name and command read into record, and felt none of the uplift public rooms imagine a witness might feel when granted a formal voice. She felt instead the memory of Ward 7, dry mouths, locked dispensers, and change tags. Chair Dowrin of Standards Review spoke first. Captain-Doctor Veyne, this panel does not presently sit to determine broad moral narratives. It sits to clarify whether your actions unlawfully expanded a health emergency. Mira answered with the calm she used for patients near panic. Then clarity should help us both. The first phase went as expected. Questions about the ring crossing. Questions about her authority. questions about the chain of custody on the records. Helix's advocate tried to wrap the adaptation protocol in soft language about frontier environmental hardship and voluntary participation. The security block pressed the point that uncontrolled external access during a suspected gene pathogenic event could have endangered multiple systems. Mira did not rush. She described Solace Meridian's route, the damaged distress packet, the scan anomalies, the medical findings on the surface, and the conditions in the sealed wards. Similar injuries, similar markers, delayed treatment, locked medication access, altered resident status after quarantine activation. One counselor tried to pin her to the emotional heart of the matter too early. "You are a physician," he said. "Is it not possible that what you perceive as abandonment was merely insufficient capacity under emergency stress?" Mira looked directly at him. Insufficient capacity does not rename residents into disposal classes. That line moved through the room. Not loudly, not theatrically. It simply changed the geometry. Technical dispute became moral structure in one sentence. Nalin followed at the right moment with the evidence module from Processing Hall 2. He did not ask the chamber to trust Earth because Earth cared. He asked the chamber to look at timestamps, rosters, status conversions, purge attempts, and correlated directives. Sarah established the chain. Corin's remote affidavit tied the biomarker pattern to designed intervention rather than natural contagion. Rhea Mock, speaking from medical anchorage under protected witness status, described the locked wards and the withheld access. Helix's advocate made the mistake Mira had hoped someone would make. Under pressure, eager to save the larger architecture, he argued that in frontier crises broad containment authority sometimes required painful categorical compression until higher-order stability could be preserved. Mira heard the phrase and knew the room had just offered her the opening no emotional outburst ever could. She asked leave to answer directly. It was granted. Categorical compression, she repeated. That is a polished way of saying that once the system believed Talos Verge threatened a political story, the people there were reduced into classes easier to leave behind. Workers became liabilities. Residents became restricted units. Patients became contamination burdens. After their names were reduced, their treatment was reduced with them. No one interrupted. She continued, quieter if anything. You keep asking whether I expanded a health emergency. I am asking a simpler question. If a person lives under your order, works under your licenses, rebuilds under your recovery plans, and follows your mandatory adaptation program, at what point do you believe you gain the right to change that person into a biohazard on paper so you no longer have to rescue them in fact? That was the real chamber now, not the one built of stone and translation glass. It was the chamber made of people realizing they might soon have to state clearly what kind of order they were defending. The security representative tried to narrow it. Captain Veyne is drawing universal conclusions from a distressed operational theater. Mira answered before Nalin could rise. No, I am drawing conclusions from Talos Verge. You may decide later how many other places find themselves reflected in it. That landed harder than accusation would have. It left the room space to imagine its own guilt. The turn came from an unexpected quarter. Counselor Ivan Sar, who had spent most of the hearing looking bored in the way officials sometimes mistake for depth, asked to see the original resident status conversion files side by side with the adaptation batch rosters. Sarah submitted them. Nalin highlighted the timing. Adaptation failure markers rose. Local grievances mounted. Then resident categories were changed before mass external review could occur. Sar read in silence for longer than anyone liked. When he finally spoke, he did not look at Mira. He looked at the Helix panel. Your position is that this sequence was lawful emergency management. The advocate answered carefully. Our position is that the response on Talos Verge occurred under extraordinary uncertainty. So look back at the screens. That is not the same answer. No one from the panel helped Helix then, which told Mira something important. The room had not become noble. It had become afraid of being quoted later in the wrong company. Nalin used that fear well. He did not ask for glorious justice. He asked for a narrow formal finding that the Talos Verge quarantine had been materially false in representation and that emergency doctrine had been used to suppress ordinary medical and civic protections. It sounded almost modest. It was not modest at all. If the council said those words into record, the rest of the structure would begin to crack under its own weight. There was recess, private consultation, slow delegations, quiet bargaining in side corridors designed exactly for that purpose. When the chamber reconvened, everyone in the room knew the decision would not satisfy anyone cleanly. Chair Dao Run delivered it in the driest voice available. The council was not prepared, on the present record alone, to assign full species block culpability for the entire adaptation regime. That disappointed no one, because Mira had never expected complete institutional courage in a single sitting. Then came the part that mattered. The panel found that Talos Verge had been subjected to a false quarantine representation under emergency authority. It found that resident legal and medical statuses had been altered in ways incompatible with protected civilian treatment standards. It found that the withholding and delay of ordinary care under those altered classifications constituted medical abandonment under false quarantine. The phrase entered the record. Mira did not move. Neither did Sarah. Nalin lowered his eyes for one brief second, not from reverence, but because he understood exactly how expensive those words would become in the months ahead. Dao Rin continued. Corridor access for hospital ships operating under recognized Earth humanitarian charter would be revised under emergency challenge provisions. Survivors from Talos Verge would be restored to protected civilian status pending review. Helix Dominion's immunities in frontier biomedical contracting were suspended. A wider inquiry would follow. Not a triumph. Better than that in some ways. A cut made into the right place. After the ruling, the room tried to recover its distance. Aides moved. Feeds updated. Delegates performed the old ritual of looking concerned in the proper proportion. Mira stayed only long enough to sign the record and watch Helix's advocate avoid her eyes. Outside the chamber, the sphere felt unchanged. Couriers still crossed the transit bridges. Diplomatic lifts still hummed. Polished people still discussed lunch reservations and trade indexing beneath a sky roof built to flatter power. But on Solace Meridian, anchored under review, the change was already concrete. When Mira returned, Elias met her at the intake lock, holding a manifest slate. They corrected the first 12 names, he said. Mira took the slate. There they were. Not liabilities. Not restricted units. Not disposal pending. Martin Hale, Earth civilian under protection. Jonas Quill, Reconstruction resident under medical transfer. Rhea Mock, Civic Administrator under protected witness designation. One line after another, the system being forced, however reluctantly, to call human beings by something closer to the truth. It was a small thing against the size of the crime. It was also not small at all. Mira handed the slate back and moved into the treatment corridor. The ship smelled as hospital ships always smelled after hard cycles, with clean air pushed over fatigue and antiseptic pushed over heat, while people stayed alive in ways that required maintenance, not speeches. Jonas Quill sat propped against a recovery berth, weaker than before, but still unmistakably himself. When he saw Mira, he asked only one question. They said it out. Loud. Yes, she said. Enough of it. He let his head rest back against the frame. That will do. Later, alone for a minute at the corridor station where the old sterilizer arm had failed at the start of this whole turn, Mira looked through the lock port at the sphere beyond and understood the shape of the wind she had bought. Talos Verge had not remained a sealed moon full of administrative ghosts. Humanity had not accepted the right to be renamed for convenience. The next time a quarantine was built to hide a lie, the lie would have to work harder because too many people now knew the sound of its language. From the far bay came Pell's voice, dry as ever. Captain, if you're having a meaningful moment, have it while walking. Bed 4 thinks nausea is a personal insult. Mira turned from the lockport and headed back down the corridor. I was about to issue a philosophical correction. Excellent, Pell said. Do it while carrying these filters. Mira took the filters. That was the real end of it, or as close as Frontier people ever got to endings. Not applause. Not peace. Work resumed under a slightly altered sky. As she crossed into recovery, the intake board updated with a new transfer request from a damaged freight tender 2 lanes over. Mixed crew, hull breach, 3 critical, 1 undocumented mechanic, and a security liaison already asking for status priority before docking. Mira read the line once and keyed the general alert. Receiving teams to Station 1, she said into the ship channel. We're taking them all. Injury first. The corridor lights rose. Footsteps answered. Somewhere behind her, in a record system no longer fully closed over itself, names remained names. For one more day, that was enough. If this story stayed with you, thank you for being here. If you want to help more people find stories like this, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves strong science fiction with heart. Your support helps these stories travel farther, and it helps this channel keep going. Thank you for listening. Until the next story, stay curious, stay kind, and keep looking toward the stars.